The slap echoed through the wide school corridor like a thunderclap on a clear day, freezing the air and silencing every sound around it. Children, teachers, and staff turned their heads in shock, their eyes widening as they witnessed a scene that seemed too cruel, too raw, to belong in a place of learning. There she stood, Elena, clutching her swelling belly protectively, her face pale not from the sting of the millionaire's hand but from the crushing humiliation that came with it. The man she had married, the man who had sworn to protect and cherish her, had just struck her in front of everyone. And standing at the end of the hall, eyes burning with a mixture of fury and disbelief, was the one person who held more authority than anyone else in that moment, the school's principal, who was also Elena's mother. Before I take you deeper into this powerful and emotional story, I invite you to pause for a moment. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in the strength of women who rise after being broken, then please take a second to like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel Stories Collection. Your support helps us keep creating these heart-touching stories that remind us of the courage hidden in ordinary lives. Elena had never imagined her life would unravel in such a public and brutal way. Once, she had thought of her marriage to Damien Hart, the dashing young millionaire with a face always polished for cameras and charm dripping from his voice, as the fulfillment of a dream. She had grown up in modest surroundings, raised by a strong single mother who worked tirelessly as a teacher to provide her daughter with an education. Elena was gentle, quiet, and humble, but her beauty carried a rare kind of light, one that drew Damien to her like a moth to flame. Or so she thought. In the early days, he had showered her with roses, whispered promises under candlelight, and spoke of a future built on love. But once the vows had been exchanged, once Elena had been bound to him not only by marriage but by the child growing within her, his mask began to slip. At first, it was subtle, sharp words disguised as jokes, little corrections in her speech, demands that she dress in ways that better reflected his status. Then came the restrictions, the friends she was no longer allowed to meet, the social gatherings where she was paraded as an accessory, not as a partner. And then, when she dared to question him, when she dared to express her fear and loneliness, his temper flared. Damien's anger was cold and precise, his words sharper than knives. But nothing compared to the day his hand finally struck her. On that particular morning, Elena had walked into the school, her hands trembling as she held her belly. She wasn't a student anymore, but she was there to speak with her mother, the principal, seeking comfort she couldn't find in her own home. Damien had followed her, determined to control even this private refuge. In front of a cluster of stunned students and teachers, his rage boiled over. He accused her of shaming him, of running to her mother like a child instead of standing by her successful husband. His hand flew before anyone could intervene, and the sound of flesh meeting flesh was louder than any bell that had ever rung through that building. The world seemed to stop. Elena's eyes watered, not from pain but from a sense of betrayal so deep it left her breathless. Then she looked up, and met her mother's eyes. Principal Margaret Carter was a woman known for her strict discipline, her unwavering fairness, and her deep love for her students. But in that moment, she was not just a principal, she was a mother watching her daughter suffer. She strode forward, her voice trembling with suppressed fury, and though she did not shout, the weight of her words cut through the silence. Every teacher, every child, every passerby knew that justice was about to unfold, not in a courtroom, but in the very heart of a school where respect and safety were sacred. Alina's life after that day took on a whirlwind of change. She left Damien's mansion, the gilded prison that had trapped her in a life of control and fear. For weeks, she lived quietly with her mother, retreating into herself, nursing her wounds both physical and emotional. The child she carried became her anchor, the one fragile thread pulling her through the darkness. Yet she feared the future. How would she raise this child alone? How would she face a world that seemed to worship men like Damien, powerful and untouchable? But Margaret refused to let her daughter crumble. She reminded Elena of her strength, of the resilience woven into her bloodline. Slowly, Elena began to rebuild, brick by fragile brick. Meanwhile, Damien, arrogant and enraged by the scandal that spread like wildfire through whispers and online posts, believed he could silence the matter with money. He underestimated the power of truth. Parents spoke up, teachers stood with Elena, and the school community rallied around her. The sight of a pregnant woman struck by her husband in a place of learning was too much for anyone to dismiss. His empire began to wobble. Business partners hesitated, shareholders demanded answers, and suddenly the man who had once been untouchable found himself exposed. Elena, though still fragile, grew stronger as she watched Damien's power crack. She realized that true strength did not come from wealth or status but from courage, from the ability to rise after being broken. With her mother's unwavering support, she began to dream again. She took classes to prepare for a future career, determined to provide for her child not through luxury but through love and dignity. Every night, as she felt the tiny kicks in her belly, she whispered promises of a life filled with safety and kindness, a life far removed from the shadows of Damien's cruelty. The day she finally walked into court to face him was the day the world saw Elena's transformation. No longer was she the timid wife who hid behind her husband's wealth. She stood tall, her hands resting gently on her belly, her eyes steady as she told her story. The room was silent as she spoke, her voice trembling only with emotion, never with fear. And when the judge ruled in her favor, granting her protection, independence, and the right to raise her child free from his grasp, the weight that had chained her heart lifted. Months later, Elena gave birth to a baby girl, a fragile, beautiful reminder that from pain can come new beginnings. She named her Hope, and as she held her daughter for the first time, tears spilling down her cheeks, Elena realized that life had given her a second chance. She had been humiliated, broken, and discarded, but she had risen. With her mother at her side and her child in her arms, she had everything she truly needed. Dear viewers, if this story touched your heart, if you believe in the strength of women who refuse to stay broken and in the power of mothers who protect their children fiercely, then I invite you once again to like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to Stories Collection. Your engagement helps keep these stories alive and reminds the world that even in darkness, there is always light. And before we end, here's a special request. Please leave a comment below. Share your thoughts, your feelings, or even a simple word of encouragement for women like Elena who might be facing silent battles right now. Your words may just give someone the strength they need to keep going. The sound of the slap was so loud, that it seemed to crack through the polished hallways like a gunshot. Teachers froze mid-step, children dropped their books, and even the fluttering of papers in the air seemed to pause for a second. All eyes turned toward the scene unfolding at the center of the school's main corridor. A man in a tailored navy blue suit, his wrist still raised from the force of the blow, glared down at the trembling woman in front of him. His face was red, twisted with fury, but hers was pale, stunned, and far more heartbreaking than any bruise that might appear on her cheek. Elena clutched her stomach instinctively, her trembling hand shielding the growing life within her as if she could protect her unborn child from the storm that was her husband. The silence around her wasn't just silence, it was judgment, pity, disbelief, and fear all rolled into one heavy pause. For a moment, she couldn't even breathe. And then, as though fate itself had been watching, a voice cut through the hush. It was not loud, yet it carried the kind of authority that made every head turn. From the far end of the corridor, a woman walked forward with calm, deliberate steps. Her eyes were burning, but her face was composed in a way that only years of discipline could achieve. She wore no extravagant clothes, only the crisp suit of a school principal. But at that moment, she held more power than the millionaire who had just disgraced himself in front of so many witnesses. Principal Margaret Carter did not just see a student's mother being humiliated. She did not just see a pregnant woman being struck. She saw her daughter. Before we dive deeper into this emotional and powerful journey, I want to take a moment to speak to you, dear viewers. If you believe in kindness, in the strength of women who rise after being broken, and in second chances that life can offer even in the darkest times, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel Stories Collection. By doing so, you help us continue bringing stories that touch hearts and inspire souls. Margaret's lips pressed together tightly as she approached, and her eyes never left Damien Hart, the wealthy, arrogant man who thought money gave him the right to control and demean others. Students who knew Principal Carter only as a strict yet fair disciplinarian suddenly sensed that they were about to see a side of her no one had ever witnessed. Damien, however, seemed blind to the weight of what had just happened. He sneered down at Elena. His voice, sharp and cruel, echoed across the walls. "Running to your mother again. Do you think hiding here makes you strong? You embarrass me in front of the whole world, Elena. You're nothing without me." The words hit her harder than the slap, each one a reminder of the cage she had been trapped in since marrying him. And yet, even as she shivered, Elena's eyes lifted, because standing between her and the man who had shattered her spirit was now her mother. Margaret's presence was a shield, a promise that this time, her daughter was not alone. For a moment, the world seemed to rewind inside Elena's mind. She remembered the day Damien first walked into her life, the charming smile, the lavish gestures, the intoxicating way he had made her feel like she was the only woman in a crowded room. Back then, she had been a simple teacher's daughter, shy and soft-spoken. She had never dreamed that a man of such status would look her way. When he courted her, she thought it was love. When he proposed, she thought it was destiny. And when he whispered promises under candlelight, she thought they were forever. But forever had turned into control. Love had turned into fear. And now, in the echo of a slap, Elena realized that all the illusions had burned away, leaving her with nothing but the truth. Her mother reached her side, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. Margaret's voice was steady but carried an edge that made even Damien falter. "Mr. Hart," she said, each word enunciated with deliberate calm, "you have disgraced not only my daughter but yourself. You've forgotten that no amount of wealth gives you the right to treat a woman this way, least of all your pregnant wife." The crowd of students and teachers didn't move, but their presence was heavy. They were witnesses now. Damien's arrogance flickered for the first time. He tugged at his cufflinks, straightening his suit as if trying to regain control of the moment. But the damage was already done. Elena lowered her head, tears blurring her vision. She wanted to disappear, to sink into the ground where no one could see her shame. But when she glanced at her mother's face, something stirred inside her. For so long she had been afraid, silenced by Damien's power and money. Yet in her mother's gaze, she saw strength. And for the first time in months, maybe years, she felt the faintest spark of her own. What happened that day at the school was not just a slap. It was the breaking point, the moment everything changed, the beginning of Elena's fall, but also the first step toward her rise.